Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The cold, metallic bars of the kennel rattled every time a dog shifted inside. The air smelled of disinfectant and wet fur, a mix that clung to the walls of the overcrowded shelter. Rex lay curled in the corner of his enclosure, his once proud frame now worn from time and injury. His left hind leg bore the scars of a mission gone wrong, a mission that had cost him not only his physical strength but also his place in the force. Once, he had been the best. Rex had led search and rescue operations, taken down criminals, and stood by his handler's side through countless dangers. But in the world of law enforcement, usefulness was everything. When he could no longer perform at his peak, he was retired, not with honor, but with indifference. The officers who had once relied on him barely looked back as he was handed off to the shelter. The staff there did their best, but Rex was just another number among the forgotten. Potential adopters walked past him without a second glance, drawn instead to the younger, unscarred dogs who bounced eagerly against the bars of their enclosures. Day after day, Rex waited. And waited. But no one came for him. Miles away, 8-year-old Tommy Parker sat in the back seat of his father's car, staring blankly out the window. The world outside moved in a blur of colors, but Tommy felt nothing. He hadn't felt anything for a long time. It had been almost a year since the accident. The day his mother left and never came back. Since then, everything had changed. His father, once full of warmth, now barely spoke. Their home felt like a ghost town, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. And Tommy? He had stopped trying. Friends drifted away when they didn't know what to say. Teachers gave him sad smiles, but no one really understood. The world had moved on. But he hadn't. So, when his father hesitantly suggested visiting the animal shelter, just to look, he had said, Tommy only shrugged. It didn't matter. Nothing did. The shelter was noisy, filled with barking and the desperate whining of dogs hoping to be noticed. Tommy walked through the rows of cages, hands in his pockets, barely glancing at the dogs that jumped excitedly at the bars. Then he saw him. Rex didn't move, didn't wag his tail or press against the bars like the others. He simply watched, his deep brown eyes filled with the same loneliness Tommy felt every day. Something inside the boy shifted. "Can I see that one?" Tommy asked, pointing to Rex. The shelter worker hesitated. "He's older. And he's been through a lot." "I don't care," Tommy interrupted. "I want to see him." Moments later, Rex was led into the small meet and greet room. He stood stiffly, watching the boy with quiet curiosity. Tommy sat on the floor, waiting. And then, slowly, Rex limped forward. He didn't jump. He didn't demand attention. Instead, he simply rested his head against Tommy's small shoulder and let out a tired sigh. Tommy's eyes stung. He understood that sigh. "I want him," he whispered. His father frowned. "Tommy, he's not a pet. He's like me." Silence filled the room. His father looked at the dog, then back at his son, the boy who hadn't smiled in almost a year. And for the first time in months, Tommy saw something soften in his father's expression. "Okay," his father finally said. We'll take him home. Rex had been discarded by the world. But not anymore. And for the first time in a long time, neither was Tommy. Bringing Rex home wasn't as easy as Tommy had hoped. The first few days were awkward. Rex moved cautiously around the small apartment, never venturing too far from the doorway, as if expecting to be taken back to the shelter at any moment. He barely ate, barely slept, and flinched at sudden movements. Tommy understood. He felt the same way. His father had set up a small dog bed near the couch, but Rex ignored it, choosing instead to rest near Tommy's bedroom door at night, his tired eyes watching the boy's every move. It was as if Rex sensed something unspoken between them, an invisible thread of shared pain. And in a way, he was right. One evening, Tommy sat on the floor of his room, flipping through an old picture book. He wasn't really reading, just staring at the pages, letting the familiar images blur together. Rex, lying near the door, lifted his head. His ears perked up as he watched Tommy. Then, with slow, careful movements, the old dog stood up and limped toward him. Tommy barely noticed until Rex settled beside him, pressing his warm body against the boy's side. Tommy froze. For the first time since his mother's accident, someone had come to him. Not out of pity. Not because they felt they had to. But because they wanted to. His fingers hesitantly reached out, brushing against Rex's scarred fur. The dog let out a soft sigh and nudged his nose against Tommy's arm. And just like that, something shifted. A quiet understanding passed between them, an unspoken promise. You're not alone anymore. That night, for the first time in months, Tommy slept without nightmares. And outside his door, Rex kept watch. Days turned into weeks, and something remarkable began to happen. Tommy laughed when Rex clumsily tried to chase a tennis ball in the park, his bad leg causing him to stumble. He started talking more, even if just in small sentences, as he told Rex about his day at school. And at night, when sadness crept in, he didn't push it away. He sat with Rex, stroking his fur, whispering thoughts he had never shared with anyone else. He was healing. But no one knew how much he would need Rex until the fire. It happened late at night. Tommy had fallen asleep on the couch, his father still out on a late shift. The apartment complex was quiet until it wasn't. A loud, ear-splitting boom shattered the silence, followed by the terrifying sound of cracking wood and the shriek of an alarm. Flames. Smoke. The acrid smell of burning fabric filled the air. Tommy woke up coughing, disoriented. The living room was too bright, but not from the lamp. Fire. The apartment next door was on fire, and it was spreading fast. Panic flooded his chest. He stumbled forward, but the thick smoke stung his eyes, his throat. He couldn't breathe. Then, a bark. Rex was there. Snapping him out of his shock. Growling at the flames. The dog knew. He had been trained for emergencies. Even after all these years, his instincts kicked in. Rex lunged, grabbing Tommy's sleeve in his teeth, pulling him toward the door. Tommy, his limbs shaking, tried to move, but his head was spinning. His chest felt tight. The air was disappearing. Rex barked again, louder this time. Desperate. And then, in one last burst of strength, he grabbed Tommy's arm with his teeth, Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to jolt the boy into action. Run! Tommy stumbled forward, following Rex through the thick, choking smoke. The door. They had to reach the door. Flames roared behind them. The heat was unbearable. But Rex didn't stop. Neither did Tommy. The heat pressed against Tommy's back as flames devoured the walls. Smoke billowed through the hallway, turning the air into something thick and suffocating. His vision blurred, his lungs screamed for relief, but Rex kept pulling him forward. The door. They were so close. Tommy's foot caught on something, a broken piece of furniture, maybe, and he stumbled, crashing hard onto the floor. Pain shot through his knee, but before he could react, Rex was there. The old dog grabbed the sleeve of Tommy's pajama shirt in his teeth and yanked with surprising strength. "Our Rex," Tommy coughed, trying to push himself up. He couldn't breathe. He felt dizzy, lightheaded. The flames were coming closer. Then, a crack. The ceiling above them groaned. A piece of burning debris broke loose. Tommy barely had time to react before Rex shoved him out of the way. The heavy wooden beam crashed down, right onto Rex's back. Tommy screamed. Rex let out a sharp, pained yelp, his body collapsing beneath the weight. Smoke swirled around them, making everything feel surreal, like a nightmare Tommy couldn't wake up from. He crawled forward, coughing violently, his eyes stinging as he reached for Rex. The dog's chest was still rising and falling, but weakly. "No, no, no," Tommy whispered, his hands trembling as he tried to push at the fallen beam. But it was too heavy. Too big. Rex let out a soft whine, his head shifting slightly to look at Tommy. His brown eyes, filled with pain, still held something else: determination. Even now, Rex wasn't giving up. Tommy choked back a sob. "I won't leave you." The hallway was collapsing behind them. The fire alarm screeched in the distance. He didn't have time. But neither did Rex. Then, footsteps. "Tommy." A voice, his father's. Through the thick smoke, Tommy could barely make out his dad pushing through the flames, his face wild with panic. "Dad," he gasped, his throat raw. "Rex, he's trapped." His father's eyes locked onto the scene before him. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, grasping the fallen debris with both hands. He gritted his teeth, straining against the weight. Tommy helped, pushing with everything he had. For a horrible moment, it didn't budge. But then, it shifted. Just enough. Rex let out a low groan as Tommy pulled him free, wrapping his arms around the dog's battered body. He was heavier than Tommy had expected, but he didn't care. He wouldn't leave him. His father grabbed Tommy and Rex, hoisting them both up. "Come on." The three of them stumbled out of the apartment, just as the fire roared through the hallway behind them. The moment they made it outside, Tommy collapsed onto the grass, clutching Rex as if letting go would make him disappear. Firefighters rushed past them, spraying water onto the burning building. Red and blue emergency lights painted the night sky. Tommy didn't care about any of it. He only cared about the dog lying motionless in his arms. Rex's breathing was shallow. His fur was singed, his body trembling from exhaustion. A paramedic knelt beside them. "We'll get him to an emergency vet," she said softly. Tommy barely registered the words. He just held Rex closer, his tears falling onto the dog's fur. "You saved me," he whispered. Rex didn't move. The ambulance ride felt like an eternity. Tommy sat curled up in the back of the vehicle, refusing to let go of Rex's paw as the paramedics worked around him. The dog lay motionless on the stretcher, an oxygen mask covering his muzzle. His fur was singed, his breathing shallow, but he was still alive. Tommy's father sat beside him, his face grim and unreadable. For the first time in months, maybe years, there was no tension between them. Only worry. As the ambulance raced through the city, Tommy stroked Rex's head gently. "Please, buddy," he whispered. "You can't leave me. Not now." He had lost too much already. Rex had been the one to bring color back into his world, the one to make him feel less alone. The thought of losing him, after everything, was unbearable. But Rex had fought before. And Tommy prayed he would fight again. The moment they arrived at the animal hospital, the veterinary team rushed Rex into surgery. Tommy tried to follow, but a nurse gently stopped him. "You have to wait out here, sweetheart," she said softly. Tommy's hands curled into fists. Waiting was the worst part. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. It was hesitant, unfamiliar. But somehow, it made Tommy feel less alone. "He's strong," his dad said, voice hoarse. "Just like you." Tommy swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. For the next 3 hours, they sat in silence. Every time the door opened, Tommy's breath caught in his throat. Finally, a tired-looking vet stepped out. She pulled down her surgical mask and smiled. "He made it." Tommy's heart nearly burst. They let Tommy see Rex later that night. The dog lay in a hospital bed, bandaged and hooked up to machines, but the moment he saw Tommy, his tail wagged, just slightly. Tommy rushed to his side, pressing his forehead against Rex's. "You scared me, you dumb dog," he sniffed, rubbing at his eyes. Rex let out a weak but happy whine, nuzzling into him. Tommy's father stood behind them, watching quietly. Then, for the first time in a long time, he knelt beside Tommy and rested a hand on Rex's head. "You did good, boy," he murmured. Tommy turned to him, eyes wide. "You mean it?" His father met his gaze, something soft in his expression. "Yeah, kid. I do." It was the first real conversation they had shared in months. The first step toward something better. Rex came home a week later. The scars on his body would take time to heal. But the scars inside, the ones both he and Tommy carried, were healing, too. For the first time, Tommy's dad didn't just tolerate Rex, he embraced him. He even built a doghouse in the backyard, though Rex still preferred sleeping in Tommy's bed. The people at the shelter called to ask if Tommy's family wanted to officially adopt Rex. Tommy didn't hesitate. He was never unwanted, he said firmly. He was just waiting for the right person. And as Rex curled up beside him, safe, loved, and finally home, Tommy knew. They had saved each other. Months passed. The apartment, once filled with silence, now echoed with laughter and the soft thud of paws on the floor. Tommy's dad wasn't perfect, but he was trying. And Tommy? He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. One evening, he sat on the porch, watching the sunset with Rex resting at his feet. He reached down and ran his fingers over the old scarred collar around Rex's neck. It didn't matter if the world had once overlooked them. Because now, they had each other. And that was all they needed. The lesson of second chances. Life often teaches us that first impressions are deceiving and that true worth is not always immediately recognized. In the story of Rex and Tommy, we see how two souls, both deemed unwanted, found purpose in each other. Rex was abandoned because of his injuries, seen as a burden rather than the hero he once was. Tommy, struggling with loss and loneliness, believed he had no one left to rely on. Yet, when given a second chance, they proved their true value, not just to each other, but to those around them. This lesson applies deeply to real life. Many people, whether because of age, past mistakes, or hardships, are overlooked, dismissed, or cast aside. But worth is not defined by circumstances, it is defined by resilience, love, and the willingness to fight for another chance. We live in a world that often prioritizes new over old, perfection over imperfection. Yet, some of the most valuable relationships, experiences, and lessons come from what others have discarded. Rex and Tommy remind us that true heroes aren't always the strongest or the fastest, they are the ones who refuse to give up on themselves and each other. And sometimes, a second chance is all it takes to change a life.